Hello and welcome to the Infinite Improvisation Podcast, Adventures in Music and Creativity. And I'm Steve Treseler in Seattle, Washington, and joined, as always, by my co-host Lauren Best in Owen Sound, Ontario. Hey, Lauren.
Hello. It's so great to be recording yet again.
All right. Well, we're starting an exciting new series.
We are. It is a special day here on the Infinite Improvisation Podcast.
We have our first guest in our interview series. Ever since talking about planning this show, we wanted to have conversations with interesting artists and educators and creative people. And I'd like to introduce our first guest, my friend, Mr. Edward Littlefield. And Ed Littlefield is a freelance percussionist, educator, and composer based out of Seattle. He is Tlingit from Sitka, Alaska, and released 3 albums featuring traditional Native melodies, which he also arranged into the jazz idiom with the Native Jazz Quartet. The quartet represented the U.S. in South America as jazz ambassadors through the American Music Abroad program. Ed is an active educator around the country, facilitating artist residencies for students and teachers to help them learn more about Tlingit culture and music and traditional ways of knowing. Ed, welcome to the podcast.
Goodness, cheese. Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. And yeah, I've known Ed for years. I mean, we started playing together possibly in a jazz big band. Trying to remember where we first met.
Yeah, it was probably big band, and then it was also I think we did one of your groups. Over 10 years ago, I think. Yeah. At Tula's.
Wow, that's right. Holy cow! So playing together, and then we've been traveling recently to the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival in Idaho, but most recently, co-teaching through a nonprofit Seattle Jazz Ed. So we have Jazz Ed himself, kids like that.
Where's the one and only.
Yeah. I tried to get him to believe they named it after you. No, his full name, no, it's Education Littlefield. So, but it was really cool. So yeah, seeing how, your work as a teaching artist and how you're working with the kids, and thought you'd be a awesome person to have on as our first guest.
Yeah, good old sheesh. I'll introduce myself in Tlingit too, if you don't mind. Shak hindus du yuchat duasak, kagwantan ayachat, kluknak adi yadi chatsiti, kagwantan dachunk, kuk hit ayachat, sheet kakwandak na chatsiti. And I do that because there are only about 10 speakers of Tlingit left in the world that were born speaking Tlingit. And if you think about that, that's pretty amazing. So I always like to share my language whenever possible. So, Kunachish.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so tell us about how you started this project, the Native Jazz Project, or starting to fuse these indigenous melodies in with jazz, or fusing other musics together. When did that light bulb first?
Yeah. Well, there's, so it's going to take a little bit of backstory to get to that point. So
it's all good.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Okay. So I started singing and dancing in my native dance group, in a couple dance groups in Sitka. And so I learned, how to sing loud, and just music was not a written thing. It was something we did, every Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. It was just something that we did when we were walking around, when we were harvesting fish. It's just, we did it all the time, and music. And then when I was 5, I started, my mom took me out to something, I don't even know what it was, but I saw this 25 people playing this wooden instruments, and it was a violin. And I'm like, whoa, I want to do that. And my mom's like, no, ask me in a year. Apparently, I kept asking her. So when I was 6, I started playing the violin, and it was actually a Suzuki group lesson that they had on Saturday. And so I was really excited about that. That started my my 2 paths. So there's which, they were kind of going like this. So I was going to these group lessons and taking violin lessons where it was very formal. Here's listen to the music, play the music, and perform the music. That was the reason. And then I would go to these things called kuik and potlatches, where the music was the integral part of community. Like that was So it was a little different, being back and forth. And then I started playing percussion in 5th grade, and it was still, separate. Like, here's my jazz stuff and here's my Tlingit stuff. And they were kept going. It wasn't until about high school that I was asked, I never even had this idea, but an elder said, I want to hear one of our songs done by a choir. I was like, oh, interesting. And so let's try it. And so we figured out, my teachers helped me, like, hey, what scale is this? What's the theory behind it? And that was the first step of me actually analyzing Tlingit music. And so we figured it out. It was a minor pentatonic scale. We figured out some really basic harmonies, just essentially a drone, and it was performed. And that was in high school. That was my first choir and Tlingit arrangement. And so that kind of started it off. Then I went to college, and I kind of didn't forget about it, but I focused on trying to be the best jazz, classical, Western musician I could. And then did some touring, and then somebody said, hey, what about those songs, Ed? This is probably mid-20s. Like, hey, what about those songs that you sing all the time? Can you do those in jazz? I was like, no, they're owned. Except there are some songs in Tlingit culture that are not owned, which is super cool. So I could share these. So I started off writing, I had a dream the next day about this the next night. And I was sitting at a drum set, and I had my drum in my hand, and I was singing the children's song, the one that's unowned. And I started playing this groove on the drum and then into the drum set, and I started singing. That arrangement was done 2 days later, and that was the first Tlingit and jazz arrangement that I created. It came from a dream, and it was amazing. And then about 6 months later, the first album, Walking Between Worlds, was made. So there you go.
Wow.
I love that story. It brings up so many questions for me. But one thing that struck me right at the beginning, as you talked about in your community, like what that music brought to you, and you mentioned that you learned how to sing loud, and as a singer and as someone who teaches and shares and mentors in voice, I'm curious to hear you speak more about that. But not only that, you mentioned just with music being integral to community, and like that was kind of one specific thing you mentioned that you felt was like formative from that. But I'm like I said, I have lots of questions, but where that took me is wondering more about this sing loud thing, or other, formative aspects that you felt were during this dual track were kind of shaping you.
Right. And I think that Western music inspires us and influences us in ways that we don't even think about, since we are all inside this Western culture. And so when we're talking about singing loud, it's a lot about, when we're in, in choir, or we're in groups like, a trio singing. It's all about the group sound, right? So that's like, it's something that there's an audience, right? For Tlingit music and a lot of Indigenous singing, it's not necessarily about the audience. It's about the personal feeling that you get from that. And so I always thought, I don't want to sound rude, but I always heard these elder ladies, singing their hearts out, they would just, and it would be, I'm in my violin training and my Suzuki method and Western. I'm like, that is really out of tune. That is so out of tune. I'm like, I can't stand it. But they were singing for the music, right? And they weren't singing for someone else. They were singing for the music, for the story, for themselves. So that's kind of like an interesting, shift in your perspective. What is this music for? Is it for an audience? A lot of the times it is, for sharing, for Tlingit. But it is also internalization of a story. So all of our stories and songs, all of our songs were stories. And they told specific moments in Tlingit history. They were parts of that. And so when we're singing and singing loudly and singing full, it's about sharing the story versus how we actually sound in our heads or
Mm.
outside.
And it sounds like too transmitting like the feeling, the affective parts of that too, like the everything beyond the words part. Is that part of what you mean? Would that be?
Yeah, it's I mean, yeah, it's about the story. It's not about the sound. It's just the vehicle of telling that story just happens to be using pitch. So if you really want to break it down, it's just we're singing or using different pitch to tell this story. And there's lots of oratory that some of my friends that are in Alaska have studied, and it even has, sort of a sing-song quality to it, up and down, and it's just lengthening that out. And Tlingit is actually a tonal language as well. So if I said Shah, that means mountain, but if I said Shah, that's woman. So you hear the difference? So even inside of the language, it's very pitch oriented, which is cool. So random thought of the day. There you go.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the songs being owned. Is that sort of like in corresponding to the story as well? Or maybe you could tell us a little more about that aspect of when you were able to, what you were able to do with what songs or what stories, because you described a bit of that.
Right. Okay, so in Tlingit culture, and I'm not generalizing, but I'm skipping over some things for that. But there are two sides. There's eagle and raven, or wolf and raven, for what we call moieties. And so those two sides are the basis of our social structure. You know, hundreds of years ago, you couldn't marry an eagle if you were an eagle. You couldn't marry a raven if you were a raven. So back and forth, right? And there's this word called wuchiach, balance. It's all about balance, going back and forth. And so every moiety had clans. And so underneath each moiety, and so they said pre-European contact in 1780, they had over 40 clans per moiety. Inside each clan, there were multiple houses. And so that's in my introduction. That's what I gave you. I gave you my clan, my house, and where I'm from. So multiple houses. Every house. So break that down. Moiety, clan, house. Every clan house had specific songs to them. So if you told a story or said a song that was from this house, it was worse than stealing. It was essentially stealing. So the rules on that were very strict, and so it was a very tight knit. It was very controlled, the stories and the songs, and so that is still sort of the case. Fast forward to right now, but people are getting more and more worried about losing all these songs. So my teacher in Sitka was 90 years old when he passed away, and I was a young man. And he knew over 100 songs in his head, over 100 from different clans, and he would never share them unless he got permission from the clan. So isn't that crazy? You're like, oh, I know these tunes, I'm going to play them, right? He only sang it or shared the song once he got permission, even though he knew more songs than almost anybody in town, like from different clans and different tribes. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is a very, there was no written language until 1972. And so the orthography of the language wasn't written down. So we had to remember it in our heads, hundreds of years ago. Then that was the only way we could remember things. And so people had a little bit of it was something they were proud of, to remember a whole story, So there you go.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I've got a song.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a song. I'm just going to play a little bit of this. And just to give you, this is, I can't play the whole song, but this is a song from the turn of the century, 1901. And it is one of the first recordings of Tlingit music ever in the world. It was recorded by the Smithsonian Institute, and we got it. I'm just going to play a little bit, and we can check that out. Just to listen to the, it's very ancient. It's 121 years old, 22 years old right now. And so just the way they're singing, it doesn't sound Western. It doesn't have that Western vibe. It's a lot of, they're singing close to the right pitch. It's like right here. It's like, and it's very cool. So you're going to hear a little intro, and then we'll play it here.
Item number 14, cylinder number 6039, strip A.
So and that's only part of it, of the recording, but we don't know what those words mean. We don't know what those songs are, but we have this recording, and it's very special. Just, some of it was the actual cylinder recording doing that, but, the pitch was close, but it wasn't about the pitch. So just showcasing that.
It's amazing to hear that. And I'm very grateful to you for sharing that, just to take a moment and really connect through time with that music, and to imagine just how incredible it is that song is able to reach me over this expanse of time and space. Mm-hmm. And right. that we have the honor of then sharing it with you together in this virtual space and with others. It's pretty special.
Sheesh. I agree.
Mm.
Well, this might be a good time to share one of your arrangements of these traditional melodies, so we can hear one of these non-owned songs that you're free to jam
I love
with.
it.
So yeah.
Here is, I'm actually going to play that song I talked about, the hook song first, and if we have time we can play another one. But this is from the original album, the first album I made, and this is the original song. This is what it sounds like.
Akshay weduki rauk iya aha anachawatana iya aha Akshay akatzitki iya aha 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 aya.
That is the main theme, and it just kind of repeats and does that, goes over and over again. So I'm going to play a different one. And this was, I'm just going to sing the melody. And this is kind of a cool one because it's featuring Jason Marsalis, Ruel Lubag, Christian Fabian, and myself on drums. And it's called Hot Ya Day, and it goes something like this.
Hot Ya Day, shout kisani, Hot Ya Day, shout kisani, Agada khwecha, Teyaka tsigu, Teyaka khiti, Hi-ina, Hot Ya Day, shout kisani, Hot Ya Day, shout kisani, Agada khwecha, Teyaka tsigu, Teyaka khiti, Hi-ina.
All right. There you go.
Yeah.
And we all know that was also another little project to, kind of use some, not quite contrafact, but like use some other harmonies that are in jazz standards. And so that one was
Killer Joe.
Killer Joe. But yeah,
I was gonna say,
Lenny
okay.
Colson.
No, it's like I've heard that before.
No, I did it on purpose. So I was like, oh man, I'm feeling this groove. And, there's a couple other ones that I'm like, I use rhythm changes in a couple, but I moved the changes around to fit the melody. So for these projects, I'm not ever changing the melody for these songs. So that is one thing that I'm really like adamant about. It's like the melody is there for a reason, and everything else. And that's what we were talking about earlier. It's like that the song is the most important part, right? And whatever you do around it is kind of the extra.
So is that fusing this together and doing these arrangements, the songs, is that fully embraced by your folks back home, or like everyone's digging that you're doing it, or do you get some pushback going? What do you?
Yeah, honestly,
what are you doing, Ned?
Honestly, there's only one person, and this person had a total valid right to say something, and we figured it out, and we compensated their family for it, and it was fine. It was one of those things where like, hey, I know this song is public domain, but you should have said this. And so we talked about it, and it was totally fine. And so everybody else, I mean, I have not heard anything negative. Maybe people are saying that about it on the internet or whatever, on the
Always.
dark web. So from what I've heard, and people are excited to hear those songs, and I've got my family members that are actually learning, these songs because of these arrangements. They're singing along. So it's a twofold thing. I'm like, jazz is an American construct, but Tlingit predates jazz, right? Tlingit music. So you've got these like super thousands of years of culture, and going into this, into this one little recording, and hopefully inspiring kids, their students or human beings, to learn jazz and to learn the Tlingit language. And I had a goal actually. To write. How a lot of singers sing in Portuguese, or they sing a French song, or they sing a Spanish song. Whatever it is. And I was like, I want singers to sing a Tlingit song. So I wrote some changes, and we actually recorded the last track, last album that we did of the trio, and it was a 8-bar melody that with some cool changes, and I put it as a ballad, so the words were longer. I'm like, go ahead and sing this song. It's great. It's public domain as long as you say, where you got the song from. So
Well-
all you jazz singers out there, if you want to learn a Tlingit song, let me know.
Okay, we will, if we can, maybe we can link to that in the episode notes. If there's a
Great.
way we can get that to people. That's a question I had for you about how open you are with sharing this music. Like when you were working with the kids, Ed and I were co-teaching a group of elementary school students who just learned to play their instruments that week, and they threw them together in a giant orchestra, all the wind and the brass and the guitars and the drums, and we had to teach them to play together. That was pretty wild. But then we had another class of middle school students that could more or less play their instruments, and we were teaching them some jazz tunes by ear, and Ed taught a traditional Tlingit tune, and the kids were great. And just the way that you're sharing and saying, it's just like what you told us, like here's music, this is for you to play, respect where it came from, and you told us the story. But just your thoughts on that in general, how you share, and as you're saying, which are non-Indigenous people playing these melodies and appropriation, kind of what your views are on that. I mean, you've shared some already.
Yeah, I mean, these songs are public domain. So let's start off with that. They are open for use. With that said, there are some guidelines, and that's whenever I say, I'm like, if you're going to share this song, you need to do this, and then you're all good. And essentially it's, you name the title of the piece, you name who you learned it from, could be me or, me, and then who I learned it from and where they're from. So if I were to say, all right, we're going to do, in a group of mixed race people, it's just sharing. I'd say, all right, we're going to do Hat Day. which is a children's lullaby taught to me by Ed Littlefield, who learned it from Charlie Joseph Katlatk from Sitka. And right there, you just gave about 100 plus years of history of who you learned it from. So I'm okay. It's so with that stuff, those songs and the public domain songs, that's really all you need to do. You say, oh, it's from Sitka, who taught it to you, who you learned it from. That's really good. For the other ones, I actually don't share those. So everything you hear is either something I wrote or arranged or is public domain. So once you get into that can of worms, that's where it gets really squirrely. So yeah, I would say people can share and sing these songs and learn them.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a problem if you have the right permissions, right? The right way to say it. But
Yeah.
I don't know if I kind of answered that question, but
Yeah, I think so. Well, in some ways, the songs that you're sharing, you're kind of curating some of this music for us. That's, you're sharing the songs that you feel comfortable sharing, and yeah,
correct. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more songs out there that are clan songs or ceremonial songs,
Mhm.
and actually that was an interesting. I wrote a song for a movie called The Proposal, and Betty White sang it, and there's a funny story in there. My mom was got a call from these random person, said, "Hey, we're looking for some Tlingit music." She sent off. She thought it was a local person, just sent it off. Like 3 weeks later, this guy from Disney said, "All right, we'd like to buy these songs," and she was like, "No, don't do it." She like totally backtracked. "You can't buy these." I'm like, "Who are you?" But she goes, "I know a guy that can write something similar," so I got a call to do that. And it was, and that's where the fine line is. It's loosely based on the words are different, but the vibe of the song is the same. So it was a Tlingit, it was a Kagwantan, my clan's wedding chant that I kind of modified to fit their needs. And so, yeah, so there's a line, and we're doing this every single day of my life. We're doing the line. But the song that Betty White sings in the forest, I wrote that. And it's about 15 seconds that she sings.
Is that
She says
can we
"goodness
link to-
cheese" at the end.
Is that clip online? Can we link to that too?
Yeah, you can.
All right.
Make sure you shut it off when Sandra Bullock starts singing the other part. So, yeah, it's
Wow.
it's a funny scene.
That's quite a story.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for that. And
Yeah.
well, Steve, do you have a follow-up question before I?
No, go ahead. I was ready. I was going to go in a different direction. So go
Yes.
for it.
So you mentioned not changing the melodies of the songs, and I wondered how that related to the aspects of it being a tonal language, like how the pitches of the melody relate to the tonal aspects of the language, and whether I'll leave it at that.
Right. That's tough because when we sing a tonal language, the tone marks go out the door, right? Obviously, maybe not obviously, but like if I were to sing Sha Kindus 2, my Tlingit name, and I went Sha Kindus 2, Sha is a high tone technically. If we're Sha Kin, it doesn't mean woman something. It still means man or a mountain something. So, yeah, it's interesting. I have a friend, Dr. Lori Hagee, who's a fantastic educator into brain science and the science of the arts, and she's amazing. But she actually wrote a song, and it was an interesting conversation. She is not Indigenous Tlingit, but she wrote a song using Tlingit words, using the tone mark. So if it's like you hut do a sock, she would do a high, like a fourth up and then back down. So it was kind of a up and down, up, down, up, down. So there's only two pitches, but it was an interesting thing. And we were like, are people going to think this is a Tlingit song? Because it sounds sort of like it, but we figured that whole thing out. But going back to the tone marks, the tone is really don't get carried over into the songs. So it's mostly, somebody asked me like, what is Tlingit music? My my middle school or my high school version would be, oh, it's a pentatonic scale. But I think what it is now is major or minor pentatonic scale with chromatic passing tones and micro, like
Mm.
oh, I'm blanking on the word,
Quarter tone?
but
Microtones? Yeah.
microtonal passing notes, so they can go.
Mhm.
They're found so and you're like, no, that's not the way. That's just them dropping. I listened to another recording. It's the same thing.
Mm.
And another recording, same thing right there. I'm like, wow, that is amazing. So microtonal passing tones. So,
Yeah.
which is very cool. I think that's not, Western music is not quite like that.
Mm.
So
And describing it that way too. I mean, it's putting the Western lens on it. The microtone is not here's the correct tone, and then here's the, that's happening. When
right.
you stick Hindustani music or blues through that lens too, and sometimes you can see the connections between the musical language, like how certain varieties of what we call pentatonic scale you can find everywhere, but other times, it's sometimes it feels like we're trying to put the wrong language on what it is.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And some of the songs that are, there's a handful of Tlingit composers or what we call builders of music out there. And, I've found that some have a good sense, there are some people that just have this Western influence. And so some of the songs are starting to get this Western influence to it. But you know what? That's life. And that is creation. That's the thing you get when you take the risk of creating something. And I think the more music from Tlingit people is better. The more the merrier. And there's we can all strive to go back as far as we can. There's another great quote, which is essentially jazz and the apprenticeship program of jazz and how to learn is. But this person said it a different way. Lily Hope said, "My mom told me it was all about an upline, and you have to find what your upline is and how far back you can go." And so for me, my upline is me, my mom, Charlie Joseph. And like I said, that's 100+ years right there of knowledge. And, Charlie Joseph probably could have gone another 100, 200 years. Who learned, you know what I mean? He could have gone back multiple years. And so we talk about the upline, and I really like that concept because, it's just, we are just the bottom part. There's so many things other, that have gone on before us. I like that concept.
I like builders of music.
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
Yeah. They didn't have a word for compose, so you had to put it together.
Mm.
You put the piece together, and it often took years, because you have to find. So what essentially the story or the song came from a story, right? And so you have to whittle down that full story because you could tell the story in 3 days, right? A couple hours a night, just keep telling the story, or you can make, what does the story mean in 2 verses of about 4 lines? Like, how do you tell a story? So you have to actually build that by, taking away and making sure all of these words make the same. But yeah, they didn't call it composing. They didn't have that word. So you built a song.
That gave me shivers. I think that's a songwriting masterclass right there.
Oh, good.
In terms of like, how can we build up really meaningful components? And how
Right.
can we, bring that level of, you mentioned like, how can you take 3 days worth of storytelling and try to bring all that to the building table? And
Yeah.
I love that idea of bringing that much to a song, right? To the construction process, or the building process. And
On the show, we talk a lot about creative process, slow and fast, whether it's something spontaneous and what goes into that, how much structure there is, or taking a spontaneous inspiration like a dream and then shaping it into something over time. This kind of continuum between what's spontaneous and improvised versus composed or built, which I like better.
Yeah. Use
over
it.
a longer period of time. I can use it. I can be a builder.
You can use it. You may use it.
Yes.
Learned it by Ed.
Yeah. Learned by Ed.
I think that's awesome. I mean, yeah, the speed of creation determines the it almost determines the vibe or the feel of the piece too. You know, I think if something was rushed, we can feel it. You know, we know it. You know, or but if something was planned out and took you know effort and thought, we can also know that too.
You mentioned noticing. This is backtracking a little bit, but you mentioned noticing this like the microtone patterns like over multiple recordings, and you also mentioned noticing on recordings as a younger person that didn't fit the sort of Western categorizations that you'd been taught, and that it was kind of, you could feel this sense of mismatch, right? You talked about it seeming like, oh, it drive you crazy that it wasn't quite within sort of like the Western categorization that, and I really related to that, you know, like I think when I was younger and getting really excited about all the things I knew about music, it kind of drove me crazy when things were, I knew like there was more there, but it was very outside of this, what I've been told was everything to know about music because it's the Western, you know, like constructs of that. And so I'm wondering like where that changed, that you were then like noticing these microtone patterns and sort of like embracing that. And I guess this leads to a bigger question of kind of what's lost when we try to like only take these aspects that we can identify like through Western composition techniques, or you know, as opposed to like investigating these details that aren't mistakes, that are part of it.
Yeah, I mean it was well into my 20s, so well after being able to notice that, oh yeah, those weren't just mistakes that I was hearing. Those are not mistakes. Those are specific things that, you know, that were meant for the song. But yeah, I think it started when I started so I've been working on, with my mom, working on transcribing more songs than just the public domain songs. And I'm starting with Kagwantan songs since that's my clan. But I would love, you know, to have, you know, just a library. So, and this is where it opens up another can of worms, where you don't want to have that online. And so I'll tell you my concept in a second about this, because about learning it by rote. But having it written down and using multiple recordings. So like, here's the recording from 1962, here's the recording from 85, and here's the recording from 2022, right? Of that same song. So the evolution of that song. And so we would have 3 copies of this song attached to their specific recording and all the metadata that goes with it. So it's like, you know, recorded by location, you know, all that stuff in there. But I think that's where I started figuring out that they weren't mistakes. Is like, well, as soon as I started transcribing, I'm like, oh, there it is again. It's like, you look at the piece of music, and that's the beauty of an oral tradition, is that it didn't change. You know, it took probably hundreds of years to change versus like 5 years, right? So in our what we're living in right now, you could sing a song and next year it could be like, I learned this song from Ed, and it's a completely different song, right? Because it went through 20 different people. So, but Tlingit specifically, we didn't like to change things. And so again, like I said, it probably did change, but the length of time that it took to change was just much longer. So that's what I say about, you know, when did I realize it, or, you know, when did it kind of click? It was, you know, it's kind of liberating actually too, to take that Western lens off. You know, it's interesting to listen to things through, you know, as I remember growing up, you know, before 10 years old, you know, before I got super deep into Western music and jazz. So like, what did it was all about fun, you know, and singing.
Yeah.
So instead of this like judgy, like, oh, you're out of tune or whatever, or you're, you know, you started in one key and then switched to another key. It's like, come on. That's my favorite. It's like, it changes.
Ed, do you know the law of the instrument?
No.
It's if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like nails.
Wow. Cool.
So when you're using the wrong tool for the job, which is if your only tool is like a chromatic tuner and a piano, in a Western staff and you try to stick everything there, you're like using
Hmm.
the wrong tool. And we see that all, but I mean, you can see this all the time. If your only tool is a grading rubric, well, school's going to look like data collection, or, so then when you start to use the right tool, or even in Western music, we're going to take a 12-tone matrix and put it on Brahms. Like, well, this doesn't make any sense. These are all wrong notes, so
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
just a different frame or different lens to figure out what's the proper tool. And I think, musicology and ethnomusicology's come a long way at, helping people see different frames of reference for different types of music.
That's amazing. I like that.
Mm.
I'm going to use that. May I
Love
use
the
that?
instrument. Yeah, you have to say you learned it from Sleepy
I
Steve.
learned it from Steve. Sleepy Steve.
But yeah, that kind of brings me on to even the education side, going back to when you were talking about your upbringing, and the music was something you just did in your community, or something everyone was singing together, and something so lacking in Western or American culture. I mean, some people get that in church. You're in a big choir. But others, I mean, so much music seems like it's something for this, the talented and the gifted, or whoever can afford piano lessons, and in isolation, you have to go and practice by yourself down in the basement. And I guess kind of in your experience, like contrasting those two models, or like what are even some ideas we can do to make, what kind of cultural shift would it take to make music more, part of the community, part of our culture? Everyone in the village is playing music, not just who happens to take piano lessons when you're 4. So if you could solve that for us.
So I was
go right ahead.
That's a small question.
Yeah.
That's a small ask. All right. Well, my general thought about that is that, we had Tlingit people, they were living in, let's say, the Moiety clan houses. You got multiple houses in an area, but inside those houses, there was 2 to 3 families living in each house. And so they were singing those songs as a way to share the stories, but also to pass time, right? So what do we do, to pass time? This little
play with our phones.
Play with our phones, right? And so I think so they had a communal set of songs. They had like a set of songs that was theirs. And so whenever they were traveling, they could share those songs and be like, this is us, right? Traveling with the Native Jazz Quartet down to Venezuela, I was at a hotel, and in the restaurant, they had a little function for us, and they had a live Venezuelan band. And it blew my mind because they were playing sort of traditional instruments, but mixed with drum sets and bass. But they had some literal log drum that was about 5 feet long, and the guy was playing on it. It was amazing. And then he goes in something in Spanish, they said something, and then all of a sudden, the entire restaurant was singing along with this pop band. And I'm not sure that we have that. I'm not sure that we have that as a Western culture to that extent, where no matter where you go, I can start singing one of our outright Steve, Lauren, Ed's song. We don't have those songs. What is it? Row, row, row your boat?
Happy
Sweet Caroline.
Happy Caroline. Exactly.
I was Caroline too. It's
Yeah.
the weirdest thing. No, I was thinking of that specific example because I was like, it's sports that's done that. Like, I'm not a sports person, and I barely knew Sweet Caroline until I like clued in and then used the community music stuff.
So let me go back to that. That's awesome.
Is the karaoke bar? Is that our?
That's our new communal sharing area.
Well, it's a start.
Also, how backwards is it that we're finding music through sports? I mean, I don't want to like hate on sports, but I am not gonna lie. I think that like music is more innate to than sport and competition. I'm gonna go out and say it, even though it's maybe a close second. But
well, what is I'm saying? Also, in addition to what does Sweet Caroline mean? Like, what is the underlying story of that? Do you know the meaning of the words? Or do we just go, da, da, da? Right? Or we all know that, but the difference, I think, so something that could get changed is to go deeper in music. I'm not a words guy. My partner is totally a words person. She listens to words and goes, it's this, and it could be this, or somebody said, it's like multiple meanings and deep. I don't think, I don't know what Sweet Caroline means, right? So we can sing it as a group, but what is that mutual understanding? So I go back to the clan house. Those people had mutual understanding of those songs, and it defined who they were to other people. So you didn't have to go, hi, my name's Ed. I'm a pretty nice person. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm like an 8. I don't have to like describe myself. I share my story with you. And I think that's something that is really not a Western thing. Like, how do you describe yourself? And I've heard it so many times, or like you ask an elder a question and they jump into a story. They tell you a story. They don't say this, this, this. They tell you a story about it. And so I don't know if you all have experienced that before, but I've, in a classroom I've been teaching, and I was like, all right, so-and-so, what can you tell us about this? And he's like, long time ago, Raven was, I'm like, uh-oh, what's going on? What did I do? And 15 minutes later, everybody's going, I get it. I get it. So we've been telling stories for forever, right? Literally as long as we've been talking and sharing. And so that is the basis, I think, of music and of this, doesn't have to be global understanding, but like at least communal understanding. Like the three of us can understand, and then everybody in our little circles can kind of get what we are based on the story that we're singing and sharing. Did I nail it? Write it down.
Did it. Well, that brings me to thinking about jazz culture and like the jam sessions, where I really love that idea that even your house, your clan has music that you share with others, rather than this kind of standardized canon and repertoire that everyone learns the same things everywhere. But that does make it cool in a jazz jam session where you can go in a jazz club anywhere in the world and not speak the same language. Hey, we're going to play Autumn Leaves, and everyone knows the song and can play together and connect. Although, who actually knows all the words to all of them and what it's about in the first? It's like abstracted. Oh, we know how Miles played it this way, but it's disconnected from the original show tune or movie. But it becomes this other language of how we connect, and being a social music, we just get to jam with others. Like at those, we're at that Lionel Hampton Festival, some international folks coming, don't speak English, like, hey, let's play this tune, and everyone knows it.
Yeah, I was recently traveling. I mean, I was overseas in London, and I sat in with a jazz trio. There was a trio, and they're like, "What do you want to play?" I'm like, "What do you guys want to play?" And they set a tune, and we played it. We're like thousands of miles apart, different cultures, and that worked. Also, so it was some singers from all of Europe, so some of them didn't speak English, but they knew. There was one woman from Japan that said the title, but then everything else was in Japanese. Like, I don't think she spoke English, but she knew that song. So anyway, that's a great way to build community and, connectiveness.
I was struck by what you said. You were saying, like, these songs take a long time to change, but then you also talked about them just being fun and used all the time, and the, perhaps even the key changing while you're singing it. And so it's like, I love that contrast of like something that is indelible or constant or traditional, but yet this like fun, changeable approach to working with that it can be both something that is like so deeply rooted that it's not shareable, but yet it can also be like a fun and like shifting and exploratory way of like being with that. Am I going in the right direction with how I heard that?
I think you're right, or I think that's a good way of describing it. It's more. It is a little bit of, as long as you sing it, the basis of it. So like, what the thing I was talking about is there's this my first drumming experience in front of people I was in 6th grade. I was drumming, not with this drum, but like I was drumming, and it's a really difficult song. So it's called Kuch Gas, and I had an changed voice at that time. And so I was like super music guy, right? And so we were singing, and it's got probably over an octave. It's got an octave, right? It's got about an octave range for the whole melody. And I'm not lying, I started it. It was screaming high, and I saw everybody go like that because, all the dancers are like, uh-oh, here we go. That, it still wasn't wrong, though, right? Even though I started it screaming high, the song wasn't wrong. Or if all of a sudden after a verse, everybody's like, this guy's in 6th grade, we're going to just change it, the key. And it started right here instead of, right? So I think there's that built into it, safety nets, but essentially it's never changed, though. Not never, it's rarely changed, I should say. And that's, but yeah, there is some flexibility. Like, one of the coolest things and most traditional things I ever learned in 5th grade in band was Mr. Buckles. We started playing, and it was terrible. It was terrible. So he stopped us. He goes, "We're going to try that again." And he came back, and we're like, Western music, you don't do that, right? You don't stop. The show must go on. But he was like, we can do better. Let's stop and go. And that's if you're not getting it right, stop and do it again, or change it. Like change what you're doing. And I think that's a concept that's easier connected in Tlingit culture.
So speaking of 5th grade band and the meaning behind the music, I was at the Coffee Clutch German bakery down in Lake City Way, and they were selling hot cross buns. And I was like,
oh, fun.
And I ate, and I bought one. I was telling my students, like, do you know what this song is about? Oh, no, it's a pastry. Like, if I had one, it was okay. It wasn't worth writing a song about, but the price went up too.
Amazing?
1 a penny, 2 a penny. It was like $3.75 for the hot cross bun. But
that's like $3.75 a penny. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Did it have the cross in the top?
Is that,
the little,
is that what the cross is?
The hot
okay.
cross.
Yeah, you got to know. Speaking of the band book, so many of, we just have a going list of all the songs that are the minstrel songs in there that we're like cutting out. Like, okay, we're not using this one. Why are we using this book in the first place? Anyway, that took another turn. But yeah, we don't have to talk about band books. But anyway, hot cross buns.
Mm-hmm.
I could play it with a little extra feeling.
And that's I share this song that. So the person that invited me to write a choir arrangement was a really knowledgeable guy, and Paul Jackson, and he actually transcribed 12 Little Indians. He transcribed it, and I'm like, later we're singing it, and it's fine because he really wanted it. He's like, I'm an Indian, I want to do it. So he's gonna like Kisani. It was beautiful. I'm like, that's great. He loved that song. We had to stop doing it because that's not what we're trying to share. That's like a really there's another meaning for that. Another meaning and another meaning but we kind of went with it for a little while because he really wanted it, and he didn't know about the other context of that song. He's like, I'm proud to be an Indian, and I wanted to do it. So. Anyway, there's those songs out there all the time where we're just like, this guy was really proud to translate it, and turns out that's not a very good song to do in general. So
I've been thinking a lot about this, especially with early childhood music, and about how, like, there are when we talk about the meaning of songs, right? There are songs that, there's the issue of just not having shared repertoire. But then the shared cultural understandings we do have, especially around things like nursery rhymes, some of these songs are not, the meaning behind them or the history behind them isn't necessarily worth continuing. Like, we don't necessarily want to keep singing these songs. We maybe have better options because they don't come from, like, the history behind them is, there's problems, right? But then as we sort of take these things out of the repertoire, like where, and as we were saying earlier, like where do we find new songs that have like deep meaning to us and that we can kind of come together on maybe other than Sweet Caroline, where you know, where it's really meaningful. And the funny thing about Sweet Caroline is I thought to myself recently, I went through this process in my mind. I was like, oh, do I even really know that song well? Let's start from the beginning. And so I tried to sing it from the beginning, and I ended up on a different song's chorus because I didn't know the beginning of the song.
Maybe people can. Yeah. Don't Stop Believin'. I think people can kind of chime in at the beginning. That might be
just a small town. Yeah. I know more of those words. Yeah.
Yeah, I once had someone at a St. Patrick's Day pub say, "You look like a singer. Why don't you come sing a song?" And this guy pulled me up on stage. He's like, "Do you know Don't Stop Believing?" And I was like, I think so. At that time, I didn't know as well as I do now. And he like fed me each line. He's like, "Just a small town girl," and I sung it, and we did it line by line like that. Anyway,
manual karaoke from the.
So this is another thing, right? Like, does our cultural understanding need to come from sports and bars and like nursery rhymes that we need to replace now because we don't just sing about like a pocket full of posy anymore? You know?
Yeah.
Well.
Oh man, you just brought up a great point, though. By the way, of the feeding you lines part, that is actually something that's very traditional in Tlingit culture. Is having a song leader. All right. So the song leader would be my elder, Charlie Joseph Kotlet. But so I was just thinking about that. I'm like, take away the bar, add a bunch of people, like 20, 30 people singing a song, and the one person that knows the song really well. And so what they would do, everybody would know the chorus or like the melody, right? Or the pitch, right? But not everybody would know the words. If you're like another clan and you need help with the words, they would literally say the words right before you sing it. So, da 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 da, and then we would sing it, you know. And so everybody's clear on the words. It was a weird, like that's a funny story, but that actually starts with something. That's actually something we've done before. So,
are there other like collaborative aspects, because like you kind of mentioned like sharing a song saying this is who we are, and you know, when I imagine that leads to and who are you, but like are there other collaborative or you know, call and response, or I'm making this very Western language, but you know, other aspects like that?
Yeah. It's mostly, I mean, it's not necessarily in music, that thing. And this is something about like the virtual and online learning and online interactions, you know, that we've had to go through. You know, when in Tlingit culture specifically, it's like, if you say something that you get behind or you agree with, or you want to give, like, let's say I'm struggling and I'm having a tough time talking about something, every 3 or 4 people would say, "Yi guaya kwan, yi guaya kwan." They'd like say, "Do the best you can, keep going," you know. And we can't do that here. So, but that's the strange thing. So I wouldn't say if it's mostly music, it's mostly a cultural thing. So if I'm getting up and I'm talking about a loved one or like my father or something, and I'm having a tough time, people will start like stomping their feet, you know, like that. We don't do that, you know. Or I'm giving a speech and I say something very, imagine that, very poignant. I say something, everyone says or gonna cheese, or you know, it's like this spattering of encouragement from the audience. And I don't, you know, I'm actually going to give a keynote address in about a month and a half, 2 months. And it's so funny because I think that's going to be my part, is like, if you like something I say, go ahead and say something, because, you know, sitting in front of 400 or 500 people, just me talking is like the most unnatural thing I can think of. Growing up with that response where you say something and they respond to you. And that shows you're listening, right? That is not disrespect. That is actually a non-Western form of respect. But anyway, that's a little tangent there. But you know, for music, you know, if we say Kagwantan Yatki in the lyrics or something, people would stand up and start dancing. So or tlukna khadi yadi, hey, the tlukna khadi yadi people, Yetki people would stand up and dance to that. So there is that sort of element of if you sing to someone, make sure you stand up.
Cool. You mentioned music and dance and calling people up to dance. And right at the beginning, you talked about, just music being interwoven and integral to community. And we didn't touch a lot upon dance and kind of movement. Lately, I've been thinking about music as a movement practice. But I don't know. I don't actually have a specific question there. You just talked about dancing. We hadn't talked that much about dancing, and it felt like we should talk a little more about dancing.
Yeah, I think it's definitely dancing goes with music. It's like singing and dancing are interwoven. You can't really have. I mean, I guess you could have singing without dancing, but you can't have dancing without the song, right? And so, anytime. Most of the time when people are dancing in Tlingit culture, it is the same thing. It has got a sort of a formal, this is what we kind of do, right? This is our general thing. So I'm going to, dance like this, and or the ladies are going to dance like this. There's that. But inside of that, there is a lot of freedom. So I remember watching some elders like you're like, wow, that elder woman is just like going to town. It's amazing. And it was just interesting because she was doing the same thing that everybody else was, right? Mm-hmm. But it was just something about the actions of her shoulders moving. And then like the same thing as a guy, I was watching the male dancers, and same thing. It was just some, we would see all these different things about dancers putting their own little twist on it, even though they're all dancing within the same, kind of concept. And that's kind of fun. So just like the singing, it's not about what you perceive outside, but it is like, how do I feel? And so watching that is really, you get to see what kind of a person they are as they dance. When we play an instrument, you're like, hey, if I look down like this, that doesn't necessarily tell you who it is, but tells you what kind of person I am, right? I'm really focused, maybe serious about the craft. My friend Ruel in the Native Jazz Quartet, he just calls it, he's like, we're the world's funnest band, because Jason is a goofball. He's like just smiling and talking during the show. Ruel and I are like laughing all the time. The most serious guy is Christian, but he's still like looking up and smiling too. Mm-hmm. And so when you see that, that's a little bit of dance though, right? Just the action of the four of us, like looking around and looking at each other. That's sort of choreography and dance. So we're still doing our instrument, but, making sure that it's in the concept of, what we're still doing. So I hope that answered that question. That's a interesting concept question.
No, that reminds me of, I was at a workshop or learning sort of Brazilian music and some Latin American traditions. And, I heard in a lot of these, and we're all asked to stand up, and we were dancing. He said in certain cultures, if you're learning the song, you're like, oh, well, do you know the dance? You have to learn the dance first. Or if you don't know the dance, you can't possibly learn the song. So the idea of just sitting there sedentarily, like playing a song without knowing the dance, that just doesn't compute.
Wow, I like that. Yeah.
Wish I remembered exactly I was just saying, wish I remembered exactly where that was from. But
I love that. I mean, there are definitely motions and things that people do, like that. But if you go further up into Alaska, like into the northwest of Alaska, like Yupik and Inupiaq, and I'm not that tribe, so I can't speak about it, but for them. But like they do songs, but it's almost all motions, and different motions mean different things, and it is unbelievable to watch. Like they're saying the words, but they're also telling the story with motion, and it's. I recommend watching any of that stuff from up there. It's a whole nother version of storytelling with music.
Beautiful. I love the synergy of communication between like all of these different elements coming together, and it's inseparable, you know. And when I think about the synergy of communication, and you're talking about the, you know, that line of time, right, of how this has been passed down, and yeah, that's how I, you know, feel it or see it, as this interwovenness and interconnectedness of you know, that we can't separate it out necessarily into discrete concepts or discrete tones, right? That that it comes all together, not only in the concept, but like through the time and meaning and experience also.
It shares so much. Song and dance. I mean, it's there for a reason. So,
hey, I was thinking, even before we wrap up, I think it would be cool to hear some bits of some of the other projects you've, been working on or have completed recently. I know we were talking off air about you've been doing some film scoring and other compositions, and if you got any of those you want to share with our audience.
So there's some fun stuff.
We like fun stuff on this show.
I like fun stuff. So my friend, I'm going to play this one, a little bit of context, but my friend, during the pandemic, he had written a play, but it was for kids, right? And so it's for younger students. And he's like, I want it to be electronic, man. I want it to be dance music. And I'm like, okay, so electronic Tlingit music. Sounds good. So this one is the opening song. So the storyteller comes in. So it's all Indigenous, right? It's all based Juneau, Sitka, like Southeast Alaska. And I thought this one was kind of an interesting thing. It's about 47 seconds, so I'll play the whole thing. But it's called Storyteller Funky Chalk. And chalk is like a long time ago. Like that's what that means, chalk. So here we go. Which leads into the top of the first scene. So that was like the prologue.
Wow. And so did you produce that?
Yeah, I got more into, doing all my own stuff, watching lots of YouTube videos on how to like make stuff sound decent. So
a lot
cool.
Of us were working on. Did the kids love it?
Oh, they loved it. Oh my gosh. It was great. They had the chat going so it was all schools, and so mostly schools. So it was actually amazing because I was using QLab, which is the sound and light triggering, but I was using QLab here, and they had a video production team making the Zoom screens overlapping. And so it was interesting because you could see Bear here and then the main character right here, and they were talking to each other. And I was just like, this person is in Chicago. This person is in Juneau. And they were live. So we were doing this all live. So I'm sitting there going, click, we had a little hand clap thing that I had to do, click, click, and time it. And so that was just, out of necessity, we had to figure it out. So that was one of those.
I love the thinking of the concept of a long time ago with this like futuristic kind of like pairing of futuristic sort of sounds and production techniques.
Right. Oh, that's a good one too. These are all great. Oh my gosh. So I think I've got one more. I
just pause. I love seeing that moment of you appreciating those songs, even without hearing them. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
So often people are like,
I didn't
even notice. Sorry.
No, but I loved that. I loved your own appreciation of like taking a moment with those songs, even the ones we didn't get to hear.
Wow. Well, I'm trying to find the right one. Well, all right. So I would like to share I have the original version of that song that I wrote, my first arrangement, the choir arrangement, with Paul Jackson doing the introduction. So, we were talking about, what does it mean? How do non-Indigenous or non-Tlingit people share songs? It's that you have a person up there sharing that song. So this was actually a recording about 6 or 7 years later. They did the song again with Paul Jackson. Actually, it was about 5 years. But anyway, it's kind of interesting. And so you'll hear him speaking in a very traditional Tlingit oratory, sharing. And I'm only going to play about a minute and a half. You get the vibe of it. It just keeps going and all the words. But you'll also hear the storyteller or the song leader. So he starts giving them inspiration and then giving them the words. So it's very, very cool. So here we go. This is Antietli Kayacha, my first arrangement of a choir song. Oh, boy. There's some great calls in there that Paul Jackson does throughout that whole, it's like a 4-minute piece, and it's just so powerful. Anyway, that was the first one I ever did.
Wow.
Years ago. And it was really good to have him on board for that too, to support that.
Beautiful.
All
Yeah,
right.
and indeed powerful to listen to, into the combination of, as you're saying, like the calling with the choir is just, wow.
I think it's a beautiful blending of it, and we're not talking about like, you can't dilute once you pour 2 glasses of water in there, you can't dilute them, right? You can't like separate them. So we're in this like Western viewpoint for a while, but we can hold on to things that we know. So, and I think doing stuff like this, doing, projects like this for all over the place, there's lots of people doing this. And I think that's one way to hold on to that, all while living inside of that, this cup, if you want to use that analogy. We're all in this together, but I've got a little part of it that I'm trying to hold on to.
Well, thanks for that. That's is that the note we end on, or is there anything you wanted to? That was great, but
that's great. Yeah, we I did. You don't have to go too in depth. I actually did one other thing I wanted to ask about was the residencies that you do. I know you frequently go back to Alaska, and I know you and the quartet are doing some guest artists and residencies and educational programs. Just kind of hearing a bit of an overview about those programs. And
so I that's awesome. I travel quite a bit, and gets me out of Seattle for playing gigs, but I have a strong connection with Alaska still. And so I do Artist in the Schools residencies, which are 2 to 3 week residencies. And recently, the last 5 or 6 years, I've been focusing on Tlingit culture, language, music, and then the general art of theater arts, so performing arts, and language arts. And so this program I'm working on is to, there's a, the level of Native kids, Indigenous kids, their reading levels are significantly lower than the median. And so we're working on encouraging them to do, to learn language arts through the cultural lens. And that's a really big buzzword around, in Alaska, is through the cultural lens. We want to teach the children, the students how to do things, how to teach content through their viewpoint that they know about. And so that's one big part, and it's super fantastic. We do readers theater type showcases with sound effects and motions that they come up with to tell traditional Raven stories. And they also they're writing their own stories. I have a lyric writing exercise where they write this big long story and then pare it down to one paragraph, and then paragraph down to 3 sentences. And then we put that into a song, a traditional melody song. And so they can use their lyrics for this traditional melody. And it's super cool, super exciting for them to be able to, have their story being told, right? And so that's an important part, being able to have students tell their story. The other part is I work at the Sitka Fine Arts Camp, and it's a fantastic program. Right before the pandemic, 2019, that year we had over 1,000 students in about 7 weeks. From all across the country, the world. I think there was 8 or 9 countries represented out there. And so that's a great program. And so I go different ways. Sometimes I'm doing Indigenous classes. Like I did a class for a couple years called Lingít Stomp. And so it was all what you're talking about, motions. And so it was movement and singing of songs and telling of stories. So we essentially told those stories, added some songs to it, but then created these rhythmic patterns to help tell the story. And it was, stomp, it's just rhythm on random instruments, right? So yeah, we would have drums, and we did this dum 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 bup bup, just totally not Tlingit rhythms, total Western rhythms, but super complicated and very fun. And then for a number of years we did the Sitka Jazz Workshop, which was originally called the Native Jazz Workshop, and that's kind of a fun one where we brought in students from around the country to do a vocal and instrumental. And we always did one song that I wrote a melody for, and that everyone would reharmonize, or actually just harmonize, because I just gave them a melody line. So they would have to do their own work and then kind of like say, all right, here's the melody. You can't change the melody. If the melody is timed correctly, you can put it in a different time signature, but just be sure that the melody stays the same. So just what I was talking about, that concept, and sometimes it was just 1 and 5, and some other people got really into, you're like, oh, that's the flat 9. Great, let's do it. A lot of people got really in depth into it. And so that's fun. And that's kind of what I do. I'm doing the in-person classroom teaching as a coach, and then summer camps all over the place.
Amazing. The one thing I wanted to say before we stop recording is that, Ed, I know you mentioned show and tell, and we didn't do any of that, but I didn't want to rush it at the end.
Here, I'll just talk about it right now then. There's 3 main instruments in Tlingit culture, in Tlingit, music. One of them is called the box drum, and I don't own those. Those are very expensive to make, but it essentially is bent wood all the way around, and you beat it with your fist. Those are usually hung from the top of longhouses all the way down. So that's kind of like your house kit. Like that's your house drum. Like if you're going to sing a song, that's your drum use. They also have these drums, which are more like traveling drums. And it looks something like this. Can you see the design? It looks something like that with the skin on the front. There's a design of a bear. And I got this for a high school graduation present. So it's very special to me. This is sea otter hide on the back to give it some flair. And it's made of deer skin with a wooden hoop. And then they're also, so in addition to the box drum and the traveling drum or hand drum. They also have these cool rattles, and I actually didn't play them. Here, I'll play them. It needs to get warmed up, but that's what that sounds like when it's nice and warm. It's got this big boomy sound, and then
the sea otter.
yeah, you can hear this. It really adds. It's just that little pop. And then this is a replica of a rattle that it's a purchase, so it's not a tradition. It's not an old thing, but it's based on an old design. So it's got a little design there. Got a person and a frog and a raven or a thunder raven. It sounds something like this. Or if you want to add beat, there you go. That's it. Hooch.
So, Ed, where can people find more about you online and listen to your music, or where your socials, or where do you want to send people?
Man. Add me on Ed Littlefield at Ed Littlefield 1 on Instagram. No, I've got about 2 posts on there, so you will encourage me to post more. And then edlittlefield.com. I've got a pretty basic site up there. And I think if you just search Native Jazz Quartet, Native Jazz Trio, Ed Littlefield. We're on Spotify and all the
Not the
all
Ed
major
Littlefield who
streaming.
sings cowboy songs, though.
No,
perhaps
is Ed
you've heard of him.
Littlefield Jr.
Oh,
And he lives in Marysville. He called me once. We're about 180 years separated in family. We actually figured it out. It's actually kind of crazy. He's like, oh, that was blah, blah, blah.
oh wow.
I was like, yeah, it's like the same guy in London. Littlefield is a German, whatever. It's a German name. And so they came over into Ellis Island. So that's about where it split.
Hey,
Cool. Well, and
Cool
we can
story.
certainly put those links in the show notes
yeah.
to your music, not to the 180 years of Littlefield
Yeah.
history. Although, also compelling.
Yeah.
Awesome.
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 Well, thanks so much. That was awesome. That was a great way to kick off our interview series. Thanks everyone for listening, and be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. And we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, it's been amazing to have you here, Ed. Thanks again, and thanks to everyone for listening in.
Gonna cheesh. Thank you.